Carl Jung's map of the psyche. The study of the psyche, as Jung has formulated it to be, is reasonable to begin with the subject that is the most intelligible to us. That is, the ego. In order to understand the ego in an edifying way, we must first introduce the concept of a complex. A complex is an unconscious grouping of emotionally significant ideas, such as memories, perceptions, and desires. The ego can be described as a complex in the center of the consciousness. A complex which possesses a considerable amount of identity and continuity. Because the ego is a complex factor in the center of the field of consciousness, all conscious content is naturally related to it. It is the subject of all personal acts of consciousness. The ego is the reference point of the field of consciousness. It is never less and never more than the consciousness itself, yet it doesn't consist of it either because it is a conscious factor. Consciousness is bound by the unknown, which can be categorized into inner and outer unknowns. The outer being the open world yet to be discovered, and the inner being the world of the unconscious. The ego, from which you live and experience your subjective reality, rests on two bases, the somatic basis and the psychic basis. The somatic basis gets extrapolated from the endosomatic stimuli, which is mostly subliminal. That is, most of the signaling that happens in your body for it to work is unconscious and only the necessary information reaches your consciousness. The psychic basis can also be divided into conscious and unconscious parts. The psychic basis consists of the total field of consciousness and the sum total of unconscious contents. From the standpoint of the consciousness, the total sum of unconscious can be divided into three groups. The first group consists of temporarily unconscious contents that can be brought back to consciousness by will, which simply means memories. The second group consists of unconscious contents that cannot be reproduced by will. The third and final group consists of contents that have not yet surfaced into the consciousness, and contents which never will. From the standpoint of the personality, the unconscious can be divided into personal unconscious and impersonal unconscious. The personal contents include inseparable components of the individual personality which are impossible to dispose of and so can only be denied and hidden or assimilated. The impersonal content forms an omnipresent substrate common to all men called the collective unconscious. The contents of the personal unconscious are acquired during the individual's lifetime, whereas contents of the collective unconscious are invariably archetypes that are already present in the beginning of the person's life. The most well-known archetypes which can be formulated from their frequent influences are the shadow, and the anima, or the animus. The ego could theoretically be described completely, because it is fully conscious. But if we did that, it would only give us the picture of the conscious personality. All the suppressed parts of the personality would be missing, because they are in the personal unconscious. The repressed parts of the personality are manifested through the archetype of the shadow. The archetype brings forth that which is denied by the ego. For the individual, this might be very difficult to acknowledge because the content is, by definition, unconscious. The shadow archetype is a projection-making factor, which means that it projects the personal unconscious content out into the world. These projections can transform person's experience of the world drastically. Projections can tell a lot about your inferiorities, but on the other hand, the successful assimilation can lead to a fuller experience and a better life. Just like the shadow, the anima and the animus are also projection-making factors. The shadow projects the personal unconscious content of the individual into mostly people of the same sex, whereas the anima and the animus project the collective image into the opposite sex. For men, the anima can be thought of as the unconscious counterbalance for their masculine consciousness, and vice versa for women and the animus. The total personality, which is called the self, is always present but cannot be ever fully known. If one could bring the personal unconscious contents to consciousness, he would still be left with possibly infinite unconscious material. The unconscious itself is impossible to grasp cognitively, so the total description of the self is absolutely unknowable. In Carl Jung's own words about the collective unconscious, this is, of course, no more than a hypothesis. But we are driven to it by the peculiar nature of the empirical material, not to mention the high probability that the general similarity of psychic processes in all individuals must be based on an equally general and impersonal principle that conforms to law, just as the instinct manifesting itself in the individual is only the partial manifestation of an instinctual substrate common to all men. The last piece we have yet to touch upon is the persona. The persona is the social face or the mask that a person presents oneself with. Its function is to conceal the individual's true nature and to make a good impression on others. Although it may sound shallow and superficial, the possession and development of a suitable persona is one of the main goals of individuation. Many individuals identify with the persona itself, which is something to avoid. Some, on the other hand, suffer from the absence of it, which is equally unstable. Every person should develop towards a persona which is flexible, and reflective of the individual's inner and outer feeling of oneself. This concludes our brief introduction to the psyche. Be sure to visit the channel and subscribe for more videos.